Welcome to the Fireplace, a warm and welcoming space where we discuss all things cultural diversity and multiculturalism. Today, I'm speaking with a special guest. She's a strong advocate in multiculturalism and cultural diversity. She's also the Chief Executive Officer for Multicultural Australia. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's a real privilege to sit around your fireplace and have this chat. And I do love these opportunities to reflect on issues around inclusion, belonging, and really the richness of our cultural diversity in our community.
Great. Right. I'll dive straight into the issues. I just wanted to pick your brains. What does exclusion or non-inclusion into the mainstream culture for people from culturally diverse and multicultural backgrounds have on the economy and the social cohesion of a community, so to speak, of Australia?
Yeah. So at its simplest level, I think, what I would say is that when people are excluded from our community socially or economically, we all lose. And
Great.
we all lose for economic and social reasons. If I can just reflect a bit on the economic impact. So you think about your qualified engineer who is doing a ride share, role. You think about your trained nurse who is a cleaner. Because they're on that journey to have their qualifications and skills recognised. At a time particularly where we are at now, where we have a significant skills shortages and we have this huge untapped potential. There's a lot of research out there. CEDA has done some research around the underutilization of the skills and qualifications in our migrant communities. It's a very real thing. We're really losing out as a country. And really it seems that it comes about because we just don't have the right systems and processes in place to create the connections. And the simplest example I can share with you potentially is people often talk about language. They say, no, it's really important that people have a good language skill for workplace health and safety reasons. What I have seen, certainly in the experience of people that we're supporting and working with and dealing with, is often you have people who have very good English language skills, but they're required to actually do an English language test, which costs a lot of money. Or if they live regionally, it's not easily accessible. They have to actually pay the airfare and the accommodation to go do that test.
Right.
And that's the barrier. So not that they can't do the test or pass the test, it's just simply accessibility in terms of tapping into that.
Right.
So you have the person, sometimes even the person who has done their degree or qualification in Australia, but because they completed high school in a different country, which is deemed a non-English speaking country, they need to do this extra step, this extra barrier. So surely there is a different, much simpler, more accessible way for us to tap into that talent and that potential. But, I think it's also really important for us to think about non-inclusion and discrimination in social terms as well, because we have to be better as a community and as a country in terms of, reaching out, making sure that we do include everybody, that we give everybody a voice and we give everybody the right to kind of participate fully in the life of this amazing country that we all live in.
Great. Wow, very insightful. Just leading on to your response. I mean, Australia is a very multicultural society, and to think that people have to take this test, and for example, the English testing, English language test, so that they can get a job, wouldn't that be very detrimental in a way? Because, if you are from a multicultural background, definitely there is a community there that will need your service. We need to speak in your language. We need to be familiar with the service that is being delivered. And the best person that can do that is somebody who is familiar with the community, familiar with the language, familiar with the culture.
Absolutely,
Where do we go from here?
And you make some really important points there because it's not just about language, right? So we really need to embrace both the opportunity and the challenge of being, how do we become a multilingual country and a truly multicultural country, and recognize who we are. We have always been a country of migrants, going right back many, many, many years. We've always been, I also like to say, a country of many languages. Even if you go back to our First Nations culture, this was a continent with hundreds of languages. So, and it's really only probably in the last 200 years that we've become more of a monolingual country. Sure, English is our language, it's not our official language, but it's our national language. That's the common language. And to come together as a community, we do need to have a shared language that we participate in. But how do we embrace the multicultural country, the multilingual country that we can be, to then really tap into that strength of being able to provide services that are right? And I think I love how you also talk about, it's not just about the language, it's also about understanding the culture. Right? So there's culture and there's cultural knowledge and cultural practice, which can actually help people feel so much more at home, so like they belong and like they have a voice, if you recognize and embrace that. So there is that piece there about who might know the language and who might know the culture, but also how do we all learn about different cultures and languages? So so if you have someone who is a client or a patient, someone who's receiving your services and has a particular culture, and you have someone who can explain to you what that culture is, not only do you provide a culturally right service, but I can learn from watching how you engage, and my knowledge is enriched by being able to then understand different ways of seeing the world and doing things and just simply living.
Great.
And all of that makes us so much more richer. I always think makes us so much more interesting as a country and as a community.
Great.
Not only does it create better social well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being, and a better way of life for the person that we're trying to deliver the services to, but we're also enriching ourselves in the process of doing that. So I think what you talk about is around, so the thinking about how do we as a country get much better at learning different cultures, sharing different languages. Even if I can share with you just even a bit of a personal story, my daughter who works in early childhood in daycare, she's found that there is a lot of, it's an inner city daycare, but quite a few of the young children, 4-year-olds she looked after, comes from Middle Eastern countries. So she's learning a few Arabic words that she can use in engaging with them.
Right.
And there's these moments of joy. That she talks about when she said, she's kind of basically just using Google Translate to learn the language. But when she says a word to the child in their language, she says, you see the spark in their eye, this moment of connection that someone has recognized and taken the trouble to touch a part of my life that I feel many people are not a part of. Now, that's, not a lot of effort. No. A little bit of reaching out and connection, and again that just makes things work much better and much more smoothly, as well as just simply making life more wonderful.
Wow, that's so beautiful. You just put it rightly correct, and I think that brings a lot of emotions into the subject and the discussion and the whole topic of cultural diversity, multiculturalism, and isolation of certain cultures. But speaking of emotions, what would be the psychological impact to the community from the diverse and multicultural background trying to integrate into their new community? And there's that isolation starting from the requirements that they have to achieve to get certain jobs, but also isolation from language barriers and certain others bureaucratic measures that I have to successfully go through so that they can be recognized professionally as part of the community.
So, cultural isolation, this is an issue where if we really don't tackle it, then what we're doing really is depriving people of the ability to be their whole self in the space that they're in. It also reaches into this bit around kind of, whose culture is the right one when we all come together with different cultures. What is the dominant culture or what is the marginalized culture? These are the conversations, really important conversations we have to have as a country. The other thing I like to say as well, when you talk about culture, it's not just also your ethnic or your national, your faith kind of culture. The Australian workplace has a culture of its own, and I've spoken to many people who've come as migrants from the UK who have said that they struggle with trying to understand the Australian workplace culture because it's very different. Even though the language is shared, there's a cultural piece that they still need to kind of try to bridge. So we all need to acknowledge this piece in terms of understanding that, that there are these ways of doing and being and seeing the world that each of us holds that is a culture. it's not certain multicultural types who have a culture.
Yeah.
So then how do you bridge the gap? There's a real impact, I think. Your question comes from a really good place in terms of understanding that if you're experiencing cultural isolation, that is going to impact on your health and your well-being, and particularly your mental well-being. But also, if you're feeling like you're not fully able to express yourself within whatever is your natural cultural setting, it's going to be very mentally exhausting and draining. And that also then we know flows onto your physical health as well.
True.
Elevated cortisol and those sorts of things. So the point is then, how do you tackle cultural isolation and create connection and belonging?
Yeah.
So you think about for any person walking into a space. I always like to talk to people about, what is the armor, what is the facade you put on with before you walk into a big room, say if you're going to a big event and whatever else, and how do you feel when you walk into that room? And every migrant knows the first thing you do, because you've kind of come to a country that's different from where you originally came from, you scan the room to see if there's someone else who looks like you. What is the energy? How are people perceiving you? Do they see you? And if they see you, do they look welcoming, or do they look a bit anxious about whether you're going to be someone that they're going to have to struggle with in terms of a conversation because of language or an accent, or even whether we have any shared understanding that means we can have a good conversation. So there's two ways around how you can, position yourself when you're walking into that room, whether the skills you can do to kind of try to form the connection with people, but also for if you are that person in the room, also how you look out for the person walking into the room who's potentially looking like they might not be quite clear if they're going to be, culturally and socially accepted, and how do you reach out and do that for them? And, kindness begets kindness, which is, I think, a really, really good way to say, how do we come together as a community? And community really is the medicine, is the ties that bind us together, that kind of breaches those barriers around cultural isolation. So, absolutely, if you're saying to me, what are the psychological effects of cultural isolation? It's mentally draining. It can be very alienating, and I particularly worry for young people who feel a cultural isolation. They disengage because it's simply too hard, and so then they lose the opportunity to learn and to kind of then participate because it's simply too hard, because they're having to kind of breach a barrier or bridge a gap that is bigger than their other counterparts who might just be much more culturally connected within community. So how do we reach out and embrace that cultural difference as a community, take responsibility for it? The other piece I'll say as well, though, is for someone who's feeling culturally isolated, there's also a bit of a responsibility on you to understand the host culture that you have come into. That's right. As a person, your culture is important. Of course, you need to embrace it and practice it, but you also need to understand the culture of the other people that you're dealing with and the host culture of the country that you're in. And so it becomes a joint learning exercise, a joint support exercise, and ultimately a shared experience. And it is about creating shared stories, isn't it? I bring my story to the table, you bring your story to the table. Together we create a shared story, which is a third story, and which means we don't have to give up each of our individual stories. That's really, I think, at the heart of how we turn cultural isolation into cultural connection.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Feels like I'm in a classroom right now. Right. Now, speaking about the different systems in place to facilitate for effective cultural inclusion and multiculturalism, how do migration policies and programs impact the experiences of new arrivals in Australia?
So really, I think there's a number of things I think about with migration policies, because they're our country, right, and come here to make a new life. And they really set the tone. They set the tone in terms of when our migration policies say you are welcome and you belong, then I think you set the stage for really good inclusion and accelerated inclusion in a sense of settlement and success. So if I talk a bit about the work that Multicultural Australia does, which is the humanitarian settlement program, people who come as refugees, government funds us to actually do that welcome for the first 12 to 18 months of a person's arrival. We greet you at the airport. And we have a team of people who between them speak multiple languages. Chances are they're going, well, we generally try to match. The person who's going to greet you at the door to the plane is a person who will speak your language. And help you navigate through customs and immigration. And that is just simply, it's a very simple act, but it creates a warm welcome. It says, welcome to Australia. And again, anyone who's come as a migrant, when it's a bit different from when you land in a new country for a holiday. You're going, this is my new home. And you do feel that when you step off the plane, that moment of disorientation. What have I got myself into? And if you think about the migration journey, there's obviously the anticipation. You've spent a long time applying for this process. The joy when you succeed, you get on the plane, but then that moment when you land, it is again more joy, sometimes acceleration, I've made it, and then reality. There's always kind of the plunge, because it's the reality hits of what is the difference I'm going to have to navigate through and learn in terms of I'm kind of like almost like a newborn in terms of education, in terms of workplace, all of these things, new ways of learning how to do things. The story I like to share. So I came as a 15-year-old to this country as a migrant, right? From Malaysia, and my family spoke English, so we were English speaking. And I remember on the first day at school, and a person said to me, throw your port on the port rack, and remember it's swimming carnival tomorrow, remember to bring your togs. And I was thinking, I thought I could speak English, and I have no idea what this person just said, right? So it is about slang, it's local vernacular that actually, after a while you kind of get with the program, you understand that bit. But again, that piece where you're kind of going, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. And even when people give me directions or instructions, it doesn't make sense. And I don't want to kind of keep asking questions because it makes me appear stupid. And that puts me back in a place of learning.
I just wanted to check with you again. What are the ethical considerations that should be looked into when we're talking about cultural diversity and multiculturalism?
So I think, really, if we think about what values we want to underpin multiculturalism, I feel it should be about fairness, it should be about dignity, it should be justice. And fairness is a word I like to kind of dwell on a little bit as well. So as you may know, I was really privileged to be part of a panel to do a review of multiculturalism in Australia for the Australian government a couple of years ago. And we produced a report that we called Towards Fairness. And the word fair appears a lot, right? So, our national anthem, Advance Australia Fair. And a really popular phrase in Australia is about a fair go. And when we were doing this review, we travelled all around the country to every kind of state and territory, and we had conversations with people in community. We call them park bench conversations. So sitting down with people in libraries, shopping centres, TAFEs, whatever else, and said to them, what does multicultural mean to you? What does it look like to you? And if you link it in with, Australian values, what does a fair go mean to you? And pretty much in some way or shape or form, the response that we got from people in terms of what a fair go means is, an Australia that has your back, an Australia that is with me in the good times and with me in the bad times, and I know will have my back whether I'm going through a good time or a bad time. And it seemed like that was a really good principle to sit at the core of, who we are in our, many different kind of cultures and languages and forms in terms of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is really about that belonging piece. How do you feel you belong? You've got a country, you live in a community, you are in a place that has your back, that will back you in good times and bad times. That's just not about government backing you. It's about community. It's about the individuals you connect with. How do I feel like I'm part of a neighborhood and a community that wants me to be here, and that I will be there for them and they will be there for me? So, in terms of you think about ethical considerations, there's that piece about what are the values that sit at the core of our multiculturalism. And then there's also the ethical considerations around how do we engage with each other. And I think there's a really important piece there around multiculturalism is a two-way street. And I think I've already spoken about this earlier, which is really about not just you accepting my culture, but about me understanding your culture
and learning it.
That's right. And I can celebrate it in different spaces and different places. My culture, I will celebrate your culture with you, but together also in our engagement with each other, we're creating again a shared culture. And what are the ways that we celebrate that? As rather than seeing the piece when we need to bring our blended cultures together as a weakness or a problem, let's see that as a strength, as a superpower.
Right.
That we all know how to navigate having slightly different things, but also celebrating a piece that is new. Because new and unique that we're creating together going forward. And I think that's sometimes the challenge that people have with multiculturalism is because they want to hang on to what they know, what has been around for a long time, and it's a fear of change, it's fear of the unknown. But if you're practicing those skills of stepping into the unknown, about coming together, seeing what we can create together, then that becomes a real strength and a whole unique set of skills that really positions us well. And I will say Australia is probably a lot more successful at multiculturalism than a lot of other countries, which have become, particularly if you look at a lot of the conversations that are happening in Europe where people are saying multiculturalism is a failed experiment. That is not the case in Australia, right?
You're so right.
Australia is very, very successful in its multiculturalism. Sure, we talk about the problems and the differences, and it's not to say that negative experiences don't happen. They will always happen in any country. Racism does happen, discrimination does happen, but we deal with it. And it doesn't mean that the whole kind of experience of multiculturalism is a failure. It just means that it's kind of human in character, because it has both its strengths and its flaws. And that's what we all kind of need to grapple with, deal with, embrace, own, share, and want to take forward for the good of our country. So it is really about understanding. I think there's that conversation as well. I think there is a fundamental ethical issue here at the heart of multiculturalism, where it cannot just be about celebration and food and basically almost ticking a box in terms of saying, let's just talk about the good things. Yes, they're really important. Let's not forget about them. Let's practice that and let's celebrate the joy. But let that go hand in hand with what comes out of multiculturalism in terms of its challenges, which is around exclusion, discrimination, racism. Let's not be overly defensive when we talk about racism. Every country has racism.
Oh yeah, sure.
Australia's not unique in that space. Let's deal with it, and let's think about the behaviours. And when we talk about things like racism, it's issues about not just kind of how do we find the people who are engaging in negative racist behaviour and deal with them, but the question about how do I, if I don't engage in racism, but when I see racism happen, what is my ethical obligation to do in terms of what action I should take in relation to that? And again, the story I always like to share, because we know this happens. I said, if you're on a bus and you see a person who is experiencing significant racism, like someone is yelling at them because of the way they dress or they look or whatever else, what do you do? In most instances, most of the bus will just sit there and pretend it's not happening. And I understand why they would do that, because you're thinking about your own safety and, why would you engage with an angry person? But think about the person who's the subject of that racist, aggressive behaviour. How are they feeling if there's not just one person yelling at them, but a whole busload of people who are doing nothing about it? You will feel that those people are with the racist, angry person.
Right.
So how do we navigate? This is a really complex situation to which there are no easy answers. So how do we equip ourselves with the skills as a community to actually then think about what is the bystander behavior that we can all engage in? Now, if as a bus people kind of turn on that person and say, sit down, stop your behavior, that's not correct, someone takes that leadership role, then or you can think about ways about going to kind of sit with that person and stare the person engaging the behavior down, then you change the experience, you change the dynamic. Of course, it's always going to depend on that particular situation and what's going on. But we need to think about these things. How do we behave? How do we ensure that we can behave in ways that we don't condone the bad behaviours, because we have an ethical multiplication, not to allow it to just pass, not happen because it's not happening to you as an individual. That's the connection we need to have with every one of us. We have that mutual responsibility.
I just want to touch on your successful tour of duty as Chief Executive Officer for Multicultural Australia. Any reflections?
Yeah, so, this has been a huge privilege to be the CEO of Multicultural Australia. And it's a privilege because of the opportunity that I've had to engage with the many communities who've made a life here, to hear those really, really fundamental, wonderful stories, I think, that are making up the story of who we are in Brisbane and Queensland and Australia. My reflection probably, and a thing that I continue to think about, that I've always been kind of really focused on in this role, is around this idea of belonging. And it was fairly early on in my stint here in the role that we were kind of we had a client voice reference group, trying to work out how do we measure the outcomes of what we want to do. So, is it creating connection, creating inclusion? And one of the clients, one of the community members that we spoke to said, belonging. And the conversation we had was, okay, belonging, how is that different from connection and inclusion? And this person said, so connection is you introduce me to people.
Right.
Inclusion is, you set me up in spaces where I get invited. But belonging, I have to feel in my heart that I am here, that I am home, I am wanted, that this is my space. So how do you create that belonging? And I think that is a really complex, really subjective, really personal experience that's not easy to create. There is a piece that I like to think about, where we talked about how you create moments that matter in a person's life, so that that's how you create your connection to place, memories. So when you think about the moments that matter in your life, when you graduated from school, a school formal, when you had that really special experience of being part of a choir on a stage in a key part, at our Queensland Performing Arts Centre on the stage, or you were in Roma Street Parklands, as part of a whole community experience, or you had a moment that mattered in sport, when you were part of a fun run or something. Memories that slowly accumulate and create that sense of connection to place that adds to your belonging. And that really, I think, is at the heart of what we need to do to create successful multiculturalism, to create inclusion and belonging. It's really, how do you kind of create the spaces and the opportunities to generate that sense of belonging, and be actively thinking about what does it mean to belong. And that's not just for people who are migrants or new arrivals in a country or a space. That's for everybody. And what we saw from the impact of COVID was a lot of people, retreated to their homes. And many people didn't really start to come out again for a long time, even after the restrictions were lifted. They were not feeling that sense of connection to place anymore. And it really needed opportunities to create spaces and events and times for people to come together. And what we do at Multicultural Australia, every year we have the Luminous Lantern Festival at South Bank. Last year we had 2,000 people walking in this parade, 35,000 people turned out to watch it.
Wow.
Right? And there were some people I had conversations with, and particularly the Luminous Festival that we had just after COVID, where people went, I was feeling really disconnected and isolated from my community, but coming together today in this space. And the Luminous Festival is just about a very simple thing. Everyone is welcome, everyone belongs. That's all we're coming together to do. That is our only message. And people have said, I was feeling really disconnected from this community that I was born into, that I've lived in all my life. I'm now feeling reconnected, and I'm now feeling that I actually want to go out there and reconnect. So that's the piece around belonging. How do we create this piece that is about everybody, to have this conversation that is about how we talk about inclusion, and being really clear that by promoting inclusion, we're not seeking to exclude anybody. Inclusion doesn't need to mean exclusion, and I think that's where we encounter a lot of the problems, is that people think, oh, well, if I'm going to include, more women, more people from different backgrounds, but I've been here, well, are they going to displace me? Well, no, that is not what we're talking about, displacement. We are talking about the place expanding to be big enough to embrace everybody and for everyone to come together and be able to deal with each other. And that's really what true belonging is.
Awesome. Wow, great. Just want to congratulate you for the amount of work you put in this job, and in this space, and also the different lives and many lives that you have helped over the years that you've been leading the organization. And I know you'll be missed a lot from the community, and we hope you stay in the space.
Absolutely, yes. So I will be continuing on. So I do have a role as the chair of the Australian Multicultural Council.
Right.
And certainly what I've spoken to many members in the community about is that for me to do that role at that national level really well, I need to stay connected into community. I need to see and hear those stories so I can be really real about representing who we are. But thank you for the opportunity. These conversations are so important.
Very.
And so thank you very much for the opportunity to have this conversation. And then even more importantly is what actually follows from these conversations as well.
Thank you.
I really appreciated this opportunity, and good luck on your mission and your work.
Thank you, and I appreciate your being present for this podcast. And that's where we come to the end of the podcast for today. Hope to see you next time. Stay tuned.